can cure hand fever. But I want to get the language right tonight. I want to get the language so right that everybody here will cry out, yes, I'm black, I'm proud of it, I'm black and beautiful.
The farther you take my rights away, the faster I will run. You can deny me, you can decide to turn your face away. No matter, 'cause there's something inside so strong.
Now, let us begin with the modern period of, I guess we could start with 1956 for our generation. This was the beginning of the rise of Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King decided that in Montgomery, Alabama, black people had to pay the same prices on the buses as did white people, but we had to sit in the back. And we could only sit in the back if every available seat was taken by a white person. If a white person was standing, a black person could not sit. So Dr. King and his associates got together and said, this is inhuman. We will boycott your bus system. Now understand what a boycott is. A boycott is a passive act. It is the most passive political act that anyone can commit, a boycott. Because what the boycott was doing was simply saying, we will not ride your buses. No sort of antagonism. He was not even verbally violent. He was peaceful. Dr. King's policy was that nonviolence would achieve the gains for black people in the United States. His major assumption was that if you are nonviolent, if you suffer, your opponent will see your suffering and will be moved to change his heart. That's very good. He only made one fallacious assumption. In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none. Has none.
Certainly are. There are 50 million black people living in the United States, and those Africans have to be organized to fight for their liberation.
Was there a possibility that you might end up in jail on your arrival?
I was born in jail.
No way to turn, called President Johnson on the telephone. Humphrey said he wasn't at home. Tried to get hold of Dr. Martin Luther King. Abernathy said he wasn't there. Yeah. Couldn't get no oil from the Rockefeller wells. I couldn't get no diamonds from his mine. Yeah. If I can enjoy the American dream, it won't be water but the fire next time. So I said, burn, baby, burn, burn, baby, burn. This is for the FBI. We went down to the pit street. That's a hot line. That's just like man. Nothing is wasted. Everything just takes a different form. What form will you take when you die? Shit.
The next thing is when he's burning the flame, he said, this is for the FBI. And he was was maybe a fiery speaker and had passionate ideas, but he was a calm, cool, collected person. And so he's singing about this is for the FBI, but it's just words. It's just song and words. A few years ago, I was listening to Stokely Carmichael speeches while I was preparing for a new record I was working on. And it was shortly after 9/11 in America. I was making a reservation on JetBlue Airlines to fly to California. When I got to the airport, the FBI, the CIA, the TSA, they came and intercepted me, all these guys in black suits, and they took me in a back room and started questioning me about this Stokely Carmichael speech that I was listening to. They probably, had some sort of bug or some sort of tap or something, but they were very concerned with me listening to this Stokely Carmichael speech from 1967, 40 years ago. So words that he said 49, we have gangster rappers, we have rappers who talk about shooting other people all the time, killing, but the FBI's not looking for them. They're looking at me because I'm listening to this speech from 40 years ago. And it shows you the power of those words is that they resonate even to now. The FBI is still scared of this man. He doesn't have nearly the same influence over our community as he did then, but yet they still stopped me at the airport for listening to his speech. And then the other thing I noticed was when you see images of Stokely, you only see the speeches. This is the first time I've seen something where he's just hanging out with white people, hanging out with his mother, and he just seemed like a regular dude. And that's what you don't realize about these people is that none of these people are evil or bad or even extra violent. It's just to them common sense meant that they had to speak and stand up for themselves. So all you see is this image of them standing up for themselves. So it makes you think that they're like that all the time. But he just was a regular dude, and that's what I got from that footage with his mom.
Our problem has been, as black people, we've always been concerned about white America, never about us. And what we've always thought is that white America equal the same interest as us. That is not true. We must now be concerned with us. Let me give you some examples. We always want to prove what good Americans we are. The very first man to die for the War of Independence in this country was a black man named Crispus Attucks. Crispus Attucks. He was a fool. Because here he was dying for white folks' freedom, and millions of his brothers were enslaved in the very country. Oh, but we wanted to prove what great Americans we were. We begged the white folks to let us fight in the War of Independence, and they said no. So we organized ourselves in bands of armies, training ourselves with our bare foot to prove to the white folk what great Americans we were. Please let us fight, white folk. And finally they came and inspected our troops and said, good niggas, you can fight. And they had us fighting the Indians. Like fools, we should have teamed up with the Indians and take care of you know who.
Welcome back. You're listening to the State of the City. Let me do this. I was our brother, Stokely Carmichael, and before that, you heard brother Stokely Carmichael, who, of course, evolved into brother Kwame Ture. Before that, you heard, of course, from the Reverend and Honorable Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talking about the importance of, again, our taking our power ourselves and doing for ourselves as well, but also using the power of blackonomics and economics. We'll open up the lines, take a few of your calls. So I wanted to give you this message from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And later in the week, I'm going to come back and talk about President Obama's trip or tour to 3 countries in Africa, in particular Tanzania, as well as Senegal. And, of course, last but not least, South Africa and the protests that were going on in South Africa with his visit in South Africa. And, of course, looking at the USA, the United States of America, and the United Union of South Africa, and look at how our struggle has been one and the same with our brothers and sisters in South Africa. We had, of course, segregation and Jim Crow laws. They, of course, had the Bantu laws, but they were cousins or brothers and sisters of one and the same struggle. We have to have our struggle linked back up to the struggle of our brothers and sisters at home in Mother Africa, because when we free, Africa will be free. And when you look at that based on how other people are treated in this society, as long as China is free, the Chinese citizens will be treated with the utmost respect in this country. As long as Latin America is free, then those of Latin America descent will be treated with the utmost respect inside of the confines of this country, likewise as it relates to Europe and the Europeans and all others. So let me open up the lines. I'll take a few of your thoughts, questions, comments on what you heard from the living legend, Baba Dick Gregory. Didn't get a chance to get into the trial of the Jacksons versus AEG live, but I will, I promise you, get back into that as we looked at the testimony of Michael Jackson's son, Prince, talking about the death of his father. And there's much more that I wanted to look at in terms of the president's trip to South Africa. And most of it is tied into BRIC, which is this union between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Turkey, which is a trade group. And, of course, that trade group will be in opposition to the policies of the G8 and the G20. So all of this will lead to economic war and currency war, as well as physical war as well, for, again, setting up and establishing partnerships in Africa. And most of your Western mainstream news media will not talk about, again, why your president is going to Africa. And at the same time, while they're turning back the hands on our gains and our movements and rights in this country, you'd have a nerve to go back home to Mother Africa, man. But I'll get into that and talk about South Africa and how perhaps President Obama's presidency is nothing but Mandela 2, based on what we saw or did not see coming out of the presidency of Nelson Mandela after he became the president and was only the president for that 1 or 2 terms, and it expired, I believe, in 99. And what has happened to South Africa, and has the blacks in South Africa, the majority, benefited from living in South Africa after this quote-unquote post-apartheid era, or have things gotten worse for them because the whites still control the land, still control the military, still control the money, and the Zionists that are there in South Africa as well, because they have been heavily tied to Britain, heavily tied to the De Beers, the Rothschilds, and those blood diamonds, and much more that I think we're going to have to examine. And if we're going to grow and be politically mature, we have to be able to have that conversation as a people and ask, could Obama been Mandela too? And how our people were not politically mature enough and awake to see that this was no different than what they were doing, except South Africa was a majority black with a minority white, and we're living in a minority. We're a minority in terms of our populations inside of this country, but not in terms of our population on the planet. But let me come to the line. Take your thoughts, questions, comments, because that's a conversation and in a very critical and pivotal examination that we're going to have among ourselves as a people. But let me come to the lines, 410-761-1592. Good afternoon, caller. You're on the State of the City.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs.
Thank you for that very important that everybody should have been listening to show today.
Thank you.
Well, let me start off this. I was very interested about what Dick Gregory said about what we should do as far as for Christmas, but
yes.
I almost think at this point we're going to have to start a little bit earlier than that,
agree.
Because one reason is because Congress is out of session.
That's right.
Until the fall.
Right.
The other reason I like the other idea that you get suggested is about forcing for and demanding for Obama to have place an executive order.
That's right.
The reason for that is because working with Dr. James Foreman, one of my questions to him was, how did he get a segregationist such as Johnson to sign that? How did they agitate and get that for Johnson to sign that bill, the voters thing?
Yeah.
And he said, that was easy. That was simple. He said, we just told him what was going to happen if he didn't.
Right. That's right.
So this is what the mindset that we need to keep now,
yes.
Instead of agitating. And then about with South Africa, I worked as a volunteer in the 80s and early 90s with the ANC until they were able to get their freedom and return back. And I remember their office being on Capitol Hill, and they always told me that once they got the things the way that they would return back there.
Yes.
Well, I showed up one day to go to work as a volunteer in the evening, and the door was closed. They was gone. So the person that was in charge for the U.S., the ANC here, Linda Way, I was able to reach to her. And she told me, she said, well, Sabrina, we told you that once we got things, ended where we can, things in place and we can get the vote in place, to end apartheid, we would be returning back home. We're not going to do the same or follow the same mistake that blacks did in the USA.
That's right.
That's
yes.
what they get.
Have to keep
they
their
get
eyes
from
on
me
the
at that
prize.
time.
Yes, ma'am. Have to keep their eyes on the prize and keep fighting. We have to, and protect those rights. And I think what has happened